3 young men were taken from their simple home village and conscripted into the army of Tamerlane. They fought long and hard, and they were all battle weary. The war had been won, and all they wanted to do was to return home to their simple village and live a peaceful life, working the land. So they set out for home, and of course their travels took them through rather wild country. In such a place, they decided to rest for the night, and they found themselves a little safe niche, and 2 of them went to sleep while the other kept guard in case they were beset by wild animals or robbers. He who was sitting up keeping watch was called Feroz, and he'd made a little fire, gathering sticks to give a little comfort through the night. And so he sat by the fire, enjoying its warmth, when all of a sudden he saw coming out from the trees a being. And at first he was going to jump up and take out his dagger to protect himself. But then he saw that it was merely a dervish in a patchwork cloak. And the old dervish approached, and they greeted each other in the traditional style. And the old dervish said, "May I find comfort beside your fire?" And of course Feroz agreed. And the old dervish asked him, "Where are you going? Where have you been?" So Feroz told his story, that they'd been at war, Tamerlane's war, and they'd won. But all they wanted to do was return home and lead a peaceful life. So the old dervish said, "Let me give you a gift." And he took out from his bag a woven cloak. And he said to Feroz, "When you put on this cloak, you will have any wish that you make granted." After some conversation, the night passed, and Feroz was about to waken his friends and tell him his story about this magic cloak. But when he turned around to waken his friends and then again looked for the dervish, he was gone. But he very quickly told his friends what had transpired through the night. They just laughed at him, said he'd been sitting by the fireside dreaming. But Feroz put the cloak around his shoulders, and he wished for some gold to help them in their travels. And within moments, there in front of him was a little pile of gold. Now his friends, quite taken aback, and said, "Please, please, make some for us too." So of course they did. So they set out, and they were rich. So they decided, of course, that they wouldn't go home now. They'd go off and enjoy themselves, and that's exactly what they did. They went off and had a fine time, bought themselves fine clothing, horses, and they had a fine old time. But of course, as is the way with these things, they got tired of their travelling and indulgences. So Feroz decided that he would just make himself a palatial house, and they would stay there and enjoy themselves. So he put on his cloak, and sure enough it was manifest. But you know how these things go, servants and abundance of food and women and all of those things. They soon got tired of it. They decided they'd go on some travels again. So they set out. And before too long they came to another kingdom, and there was a huge palace. They decided that they would go and introduce themselves, feeling now very resplendent in their robes, of course. Everything had quite changed from the simple young fellows that set out to war. So it so happened that the daughter of the king saw these three resplendent young men riding up on their steeds, and came out to greet them, of course veiling herself, as was the custom in those days, and giving them hospitality, asking them questions about where they'd been and what they'd done. And of course one of the questions was, where did you get all of your wealth? Well, the one thing that the dervish had said to Feroz when the gift was given, don't tell a woman, because if you do, it will be the worse for you. Now, somehow, you know how these things are, Feroz had completely forgotten that. So this guileless and beautiful young woman, when she posed the question to Feroz, well, where did you... Well, of course, out it came, the story of the dervish. She said, please, will you manifest me some rubies, and I'd like a diamond ring. Well, of course, it was done. Well, you know, she wanted it. I want that cloak. So, being a smart and wily young miss, she devised a plan. So, you know, of course, what she had to do to bring it about, she seduced him. And then, in the meantime, she'd gone off and ordered a cloak to be made exactly like the one that he had. And so, she exchanged it. Well, after they'd been given hospitality, it was time for the young men to move on, and so they did. But when they got on their way and they tried to manifest what it was that they needed, it didn't work. So immediately, of course, Feroz realized what had happened, but what could he do? There were only three of them. If they went back to the palace, they'd be beset by the king's soldiers, and so he tried to devise a plan for himself, but nothing kind of came to him. But then turns up the dervish. There he is. He said, what's happened, my son? So Feroz tells him the story. Oh, he said, well, take this trumpet of Iskander. When you blow this trumpet, a company of soldiers will be made manifest. You'll be able to siege the palace and get back your cloak. Well, dervish disappeared, of course, again. Feroz blew the trumpet. Sure enough, a whole company of soldiers on horses were right there. But it was night time, not the time to besiege the palace, so they decided that they would wait the night. But you know how these things are. Word got into the palace to the princess that Feroz was outside with a legion of soldiers, and that he had Iskander's trumpet, which manifest soldiers at any blow. So, of course, this wily young female dressed herself in servant's garbs and made her way out where they were encamped, and there was the trumpet hanging on the tent pole outside Feroz's tent. So she just whipped it under her servant's cloak and went back to the palace and said to her father, the king, "Here, father, we have Iskander's trumpet. You blow it and you have a legion of soldiers." Well, you know what happened. Don't even have to tell the story. Nothing Feroz could do. He didn't have any way now that he could claim back his cloak, nor the trumpet. So all the three young men could do was to set out back to their home village. Lost everything, gone. But then again, when they settled down for the evening, there was the dervish. And he said to Feroz, "Now you've learned a very important lesson. Let me give to you this bag. There you see it, a saddle bag of kinds, a knapsack we would call it, I guess." And the dervish said to Feroz, "This bag can never be taken from you. It can never be stolen. When you put your hand into it, it will bring you sustenance, and it will also bring sustenance to whomever it is that is there." So Feroz took the bag, and again the dervish was gone. Feroz dipped into the bag, and there was a meal which he partook of, and then he shared with his friends. They completed their travels and returned to their village, where there had been a great famine. They found their parents almost dead from hunger, many of the townspeople already deceased. But Feroz went from house to house and provided sustenance for all who remained. The three young men buried those who had passed on and were able to provide that which was needed for their village and beyond from then on. Like all of these Sufi stories, they ask the questions and also provide the answers, just like this wonderful video that we're going to see of Bab Aziz. But after hearing this story, what would you say is the lesson of which the dervish spoke? You have learned an important lesson. What is that lesson we all have learned? And what is this bag, this satchel, that we now know that we can dip into and find sustenance, complete sustenance for ourselves and all of life, that which is made manifest when stillness and movement meet. Tao, the Dhamma.
I feel that the lesson is that giving is much better than receiving. Before they were just taking from life, and they were restless all the time, never happy with what they got, because at a certain time, they were not satisfied anymore. And when they started when they got the last gift from the dervish, they started to give, and because of that, they found peace because of the giving. And the bag itself, I would see as the inner strength, the inner being, the inner what we really are, not the outside.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I would maybe add that the lesson is also that was the egoic mind first, that they employed by using those gifts from the dervish.
Yes.
And then the last gift, when they exhausted that, and they've experienced the suffering and the bliss that brings, the ups and downs, they give into the inner self. Yeah.
Deeper. Go deeper.
I think the lesson is being intimate.
Yes.
And the lifesaver is consciousness.
So with this story, now, as the kind of the background that's there for us when we watch Babazi's, there's no doubt that we'll find it all encapsulated in that, so that we also find the answer to the questions that have been posed these last days. How does it work for us? Where does that endless sustenance arise from? How does it happen for us? How do the laws of life work for us?
Being one with the universe.
Being one.
Just totally one with it.
Yes, but the universe is movement.
Yes. So are we.
Yes, are we?
Yes. I would say so, even though we are still in a way. We are moving too. If nothing is ever still.
Okay, let's watch Babazi's and see whether we still have that thought that everything is movement. What is this stillness then?
Stillness in the movement.
Okay, let's see what it brings up for us, shall we?